Hey everybody, here we are. We're going to wrap up chapter 11 today. There's actually a section 5 and 6, but section 6 is incredibly brief. We're just going to smush them all in here together. So sit back and let's take a look at chapter 11, section 5, protecting and sustaining freshwater lakes, rivers, and fisheries. Basically just dealing with the freshwater end of it. Freshwater ecosystems are strongly affected by human activities on the adjacent land. Fresh water. We tend to put our cities near fresh water. We're on the lakes, we're on the rivers, etc. And once again, this is going to be really close to humans in general, so this isn't really very shocking. Anything we do, any kind of protection we talk about, has got to include some protection of the watersheds, the area where it drains into. So a watershed around a river, it rains here, but where it's going into, or in an aquifer where it's draining into. There has to be some level of protection outside of just the river itself, because we could fix anything here, but if it keeps coming into it from adjacent lands, it's just got to be addressed as well. So just something that we have to think about as we look at these situations. 40% of our freshwater fish species in North America right now are either vulnerable, threatened, or endangered. 40% are already at these levels. Many of our freshwater wetlands have been destroyed. We've drained them or filled them in for development for some odd reason typically, but a lot of them are already destroyed, so we don't have that. Invasive species. We will touch base on those pretty heavily here in just a minute, but invasive species have wreaked havoc all over. We're a more global economy now, and it's easier for things to travel and move around. A lot of our freshwater stocks are just getting over harvested. Once again, we want catfish or trout or certain fishes, and a lot of they're just getting over harvested. We're taking too many out. And a lot of this just comes down to plain old-fashioned human population pressures. The more of us around, the more food we want, or recreation. Everybody likes to go here. More people on the planet, more people in the area, and just basic human population pressures are a huge issue when we're looking at our freshwater fisheries, supplies, and environment where the fish live. Let's take a look at a case study, specifically the Great Lakes. Now, the Great Lakes collectively are the world's largest body of fresh water. They're all interconnected. We talk about Lake Superior, Lake Erie, Lake Michigan, but they're all interconnected. And together, once again, the largest body of fresh water on the planet. Well, the Great Lakes have been invaded by no less than 180 non-native species being brought in there, dropping off from a fish tank, coming in from another source, people letting things go, what have you. There's lots of different reasons. The sea lamprey. We talked about lamprey before in another, but sea lamprey, a parasite, they will attach onto a fish. They literally suck the blood, nutrients out of the fish. And if their host begins to die, they break off and go find another one. Sea lamprey in the Great Lakes have been a very detrimental species. The zebra mussel. I have a picture of zebra mussel up here. These are attached onto water supply. These are kind of thumb-sized little mussels. They were brought over, we're pretty sure, in a bilge tank. It's one of these ballast tanks. You take the water in over here. They came over to the Great Lakes, dumped the water there so they could take on a load, and the zebra mussels were introduced. They have literally covered the floor of the Great Lakes. Untold millions, if not billions of dollars of damage by the zebra mussel. They're quite small. And then more recently, the quagga mussel. The quagga mussel is a larger mussel, and once again, it's been brought over. We think the quagga is from a Russian ship, just because that's where their native home is. But once again, they have invaded this area, taken over, they're eating the different food supplies. We add anything into the food chain and it causes a disruption. And also the Asian carp. So here's a picture of the Asian carp. These things get huge, massive. They were brought in, and dropped off. They thought, oh, they can eat this or do these other things. They thought they'd be beneficial. These things grow up to be, they can be almost as big as I am, quite large, eat large amounts of food. There were no natural predators to these guys. And they have been moving up in a lot of the rivers, but now up into the Great Lakes, and it's virtually impossible to get rid of some of these species once they make their way in. In some cases, there's some sponges that'll attach to the mussels and kill them off, but then we got to look at what are the problem with these little sponges. If it's killing off the zebra mussels, what else in the system? But a lot of these invasive species have just caused very specific issues and problems throughout the Great Lakes, and that's just a case study. Many places all up and down the eastern seaboard across the west where we have invasive species stories about it. Now, river basins. When we look at rivers in general, just the Columbia River in the United, goes from the United States and into Canada. There are over 119 dams on the Columbia River alone. Now, dams do a lot for us, human-wise. We get our hydroelectric power from them. So they provide water to major urban areas because we back it up, we store the water, and then we can use that for drinking water, supply, irrigation, you name it, a lot of things. However, we started putting in a lot of these dams, it affects other species. The wild Pacific salmon population has dropped by 94%. And most of that is specifically because dams, they can't make their way back up to their spawning grounds. They die before spawning, and the salmon population has dropped massively, mainly because of dams. They provide a lot of benefit for humans, but at the same hand, they wind up doing an awful lot of damage to the natural ecosystems, and this is something that we're looking at. Can we actually remove some of the dams? Can we make a different way to get some of these services that humans need that are not going to completely damage the ecosystem services that the rivers that they dam up are supporting? Now, ecosystem services of rivers, you're thinking, what are these things? Well, they're delivering nutrients down to the sea. These things help to actually maintain coastal fisheries. Remember, estuaries are one of the highest NPP productivity areas on the planet because all the nutrients being dropped off. When we start damming everything up, the sediments settle down, the nutrients are staying here, not making it to the next level, not making it to the next level. Louisiana is largely sinking into the sea because none of the sediments are making their way, rivers being dammed up. And this silt getting deposited is another one of these ecosystem services that's actually required down in the deltas to maintain those ecological niches. They purify water. Rivers are very good at purifying water. All the turning and bubbling over, aerating the water. We have living things taking any of the pollutants out, and rivers are natural purification systems, getting clean water down to the ocean. They renew and renourish our wetlands. Typically, wetlands tend to be down towards the end of the river systems where the water is moving slower and flatter. And our wetlands, once again, these are huge ecological basins for all kinds of diverse wildlife, which they're there providing for. Our rivers are also just habitats for a lot of different wildlife. Whether it's waterfowl, deer coming down to the rivers to get water, bear hunting for salmon, the fish in it, streams, insects that have larvae and hatch from it, just a whole host of organisms are absolutely dependent on these river basins, which add into all the ecological services, which human beings need as well. So we've got to find a way to balance both ends. Well, when it comes to protecting our watersheds, we have laws. So a lot of these freshwater ecosystems, we do have laws on the books, but along with the laws on the books, we got to come up with ways to provide economic incentives. People have to say, what's the bottom line? How can I benefit from it? We'll protect it if there's some sort of financial gain or benefit that we're interested in. And we need to have some restoration efforts. Now, honestly, restoration efforts don't go very far if we haven't fixed the initial problem. So this is where some of those economic incentives and laws have to kick in. We have to fix the ongoing issue before we try and do a restoration. Otherwise, we're constantly restoring and we're not getting anywhere from it. Now with our wild rivers and scenic areas, 1968 there was the National Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. A lot of these areas don't have access from road and etc. or only by trails. So that's what this law is set up to protect. And it keeps 3% of our rivers free flowing. Yeah, 3%. This act is there to help keep some of the scenic and the wild areas where they don't get dammed or used up or drained off for irrigation, but currently is only protecting 3% of our wild and scenic rivers. Once again, not very much. A lot of these things we've got to up the numbers because as humans get more and more populous, we flood into other areas and all of a sudden the areas that used to be wild aren't wild anymore. Another one is just sustainable management. We're talking about protecting our freshwater fisheries. We've got to come up with some way to have sustainable management, that it's going to go on. It's going to be there for my children's 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 children is what we're after. So we've got to support populations of commercial and sport fishing species. So that's, we want to have catch and release areas only, or you have to catch fish above a certain size and you can only catch so many a day, whatever it may be, to help prevent the overfishing. But gone are the days we're going to just catch everything we can and keep it. Catch and release is good. In certain sections you can only catch and release. Otherwise, limits. You can only catch so many and they have to be at least a certain size. And we need to reduce and eliminate, if at all possible, invasive species. Once again, invasive species tend to not have a natural predator in this area. That cause massive disruption of the food webs, food chains, and we need to be able to identify them, remove them if at all possible, and hopefully eliminate it. Well, some of our approaches to this. Well, once again, like with the fishing, we can regulate the time and length of the season. Well, you can only fish for so long. We can open the season and close it, especially leaving breeding season out of it so that we're not fishing while they're trying to breed. We can build reservoirs and stock these with fish. We need to have areas that we do have and stock them. Put fish in protected areas so that we have stocks of fish to release back into the wild areas. And we need to do more to try and prevent some of this cultural eutrophication, these large inputs of plant nutrients, whether it's fertilizers, phosphates, nitrates, coming into the system, whether it's coming from us washing our clothes and the phosphates from the detergents going into the system, or whether it's nitrogen from fertilizers, also phosphates from fertilizer, even from phosphorus mines, leaching and making it in. All of this just adds to excess nutrients in the rivers, leads to too much growth of algae. The growth of algae leads to bacteria coming in. Bacteria are using up the oxygen and the fish die in the process we know of as cultural eutrophication. These are just some of the issues for it. Now, chapter 11.6 is priorities for sustaining aquatic biodiversity. This is just really short and brief. I'm going to tie it right up in here. Well, what are the priorities for sustaining our aquatic biodiversity? Well, first off, it is to map and inventory the aquatic biodiversity. We need to know where it is and what it is. So once again, it's not just the United States, Amazon, all over the place. We need to know what our biodiversity is so we can better know how to protect it. We want to identify and preserve the hot spots. Once again, if we map it, we find out where things are. We really need to concentrate some efforts here. Certain areas are hot spots. We have greater biodiversity, and obviously we need to target these areas. We need to do more to create larger and fully protected marine reserves. We need some of these reserves where everything is off. There's no mining, there's no drilling, there's no fishing. It's a preserve. It's a reserve. Nothing is there. It's allowed, let nature take its course there. This helps a lot of various things, but we need to identify more areas and set up more preserves. We need to protect and restore the world's lakes and rivers. The lakes and rivers that we do have, they need our attention. They're not endless resources. The human population has grown so great, our technology so much. If we're not careful, we can overwhelm these. We have to have things in place to protect them, and in some places restore, fix them. The United States, we do a pretty good job, but a lot of countries, they have not. So we're talking a global effort, not just in the United States. We need to have more ecological restoration projects worldwide. Restoration. Some of these things have been damaged, but it's not irreversible. But it is going to take work. It is going to take effort. Get a chance, join one of these restoration efforts. We're doing a local cleanup of a lake or a river or a stream nearby. When you hear of one of these, hey, take a Saturday, go out and contribute. Do something to make it better. And we need to make conservation financially rewarding. We need to come up with these win-win situations. We talk about the economics and the politics of it all. We need to make conservation financially rewarding, and people have to see, hey, there's a benefit to it. If we do this, there's going to be benefit, whether it's tax breaks, some sort of incentives, but conservation has got to be something that is not just, well, it's a good thing to do. A lot of people need that financial kick to go into it. Guys, that wraps it up for chapter 11. Take care, and we'll see you next time.